Welcome to Team Leadership Radio. That's TEEM, Train, Equip, Empower, and Mobilize Leadership. I'm your host, Dr. Cecilia Martin, and I have joining me tonight Erik Robert Fleming. Erik Fleming is an American politician who was a member of the Mississippi House of Representatives and represented the 72nd District for nearly a decade. Erik is also the former Director of Policy with the American Civil Liberties Union of Mississippi, and then later went on to become a Deputy Sheriff with the Fulton County Sheriff's Office in Georgia. Although he no longer serves in office, Erik Fleming continues in politics and is an advocate for the causes of African Americans through his politically charged podcast entitled A Moment with Erik Fleming. And I'm excited to have a few moments with him here tonight. Welcome, Erik. Thank you for joining me.
Hey, Doc. How you doing?
I'm doing lovely. And it's a holiday season. Are you ready?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm buying gifts and just get the whole holiday vibe going on right now.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. It's a wonderful time of year. I tell you that much. So, is it cold in Chicago right now? You grew up in Chicago, but you're now in Georgia, right?
Yes. And the answer is cold in Chicago.
Yeah, it's a wicked cold in Chicago.
Yeah, that's a given. It's cold in Chicago.
Yes. Tell me, what was it like growing up there, and what did your parents do for a living?
So my dad did a lot of things, but he was primarily a bus driver for the Chicago Transit Authority up there. And my mom, he was also a police officer too, but most of his career has been either, driving buses, either with the CTA or with private companies, right? Mm-hmm. And then my mom, she was an educator. She was, you remember the movie Cooley High?
Yeah.
She actually taught at the real one. She was the cheerleader for 8 years, and then she left to work for the Board of Health, health educator for the city of Chicago. So she did that for 30 some years, and then she retired, and she passed away in 2013.
Okay. My goodness. Cooley High?
Yeah.
Oh, man, that's a classic. So when you grew up in Chicago, did you like the cold? I mean, for me, when I consulted there for a year, and I went every month. And at some point, when your eyelids start to freeze, you're like, God, why are you mad at these people? It's an ungodly cold in Chicago. And I know people live there and they get raised there, but I don't know how you grow up loving that type of weather.
Well, you don't love it, but you get used to it, because it's like, people, that's why house music is like popular in Chicago. Because you had to dance. You had to dance to be waiting. Had to dance to get to the store. I mean, it's cold.
Yeah.
And fortunately, growing up on the south side of Chicago, you didn't get the full lake effect, right? The further east you went toward the worse it got, because that's where that Lake Michigan wind effect kicks in. Okay. And downtown you've got all the buildings, so that wind, that you hit the right alley or right street, that wind's gonna hit you really, really hard. So
it's gonna get you.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
But that's the joke why we didn't have, you never saw Black people sitting in Soldier Field because it is right on the lake. And it's like, no way we sitting out there watching the Bears. And the Bears weren't really that good back then. So,
Nah, they wasn't too good. They wasn't too good.
no, so we weren't going to be sitting out there in that free, in the cold to watch them play. But
Yeah.
Chicago was a great, aside from the winter, Chicago was a great place. I say those 20 years, well, 18 years that I lived there from 65 to 83 were probably the best years to be a Black person in Chicago.
Mm.
You saw businesses, you had businesses throughout the history, but it was like those 18 years led to the first Black mayor we ever had, and that was Harold Washington. And you could see that political power develop during that time.
Yeah, I read Michelle Obama's book and of course saw her documentary, and she talks about life growing up on the south side or in the south side of Chicago, and she had the same sentiment. She loved it. There was community and a sense of pride there. And just hearing that your mom worked at Cooley High. I mean, you see these things on TV, and you're like, okay, that was real. And your dad was a bus driver.
Mm-hmm.
So, how did you go from Chicago to Mississippi, of all places?
Well, Jackson State said I didn't have to pay for anything to go to
Okay,
college. That,
that
that,
worked.
that was the appeal. But fortunately, my dad is from Mississippi originally. He was born there. And so he left, I guess, when he was 2, and he grew up in the southern part of Illinois. And, but, still had relatives and stuff down there. So, once I got used to the culture shock of being a city boy, now I'm down here in Mississippi, right?
Mm-hmm.
But Mississippi is really not as bad as it was portrayed, and of course, it was a different time than when my dad was, born there.
Sure.
But it is not as bad as far as interacting with people about stuff to do and all that. It's just Mississippi ain't got no money. That's the biggest issue.
Yeah.
Not, money, not like Georgia or not like Chicago. You know what I'm saying? It's like there's not, a lot of wealth there. And so people make it, and and they do what they do. And Jackson State, biased or unbiased, however you want to look at it, how I say it, is one of the best colleges in the nation, let alone a historically Black college.
That's right. Yeah.
And it's right there in the heart of the state. So Mississippi is a good place. It's you just gotta get used to it, and then there's a history between Chicago and Mississippi. A lot of the Black people who live in Chicago have roots in Mississippi, as well as other parts of the South, but primarily Mississippi.
Wow,
So
do tell.
yeah, so
I had
it's
no
like,
idea.
yeah, and that's when I used to give speeches down there. I used to tell folks I was from a little small town up north in Mississippi called Chicago, and they understood. Yeah.
Okay, so you obviously adjusted well because you ended up getting in politics, held your office for nearly a decade, I think nine years and some months. How did you get into politics? Is it something that you aspired to do? I mean, how did you make the transition from Chicago to Jackson State, and now you're in politics?
Well, if you grow up in Chicago, politics is something that right? So my great aunt was my main influence, a lady named Margie Spencer. And she never ran for political office. All she did was vote, but she paid attention. So whenever she babysat me, which is basically every day while I was in school, it was like, I would sit down and watch the TV with her and watching the news and all that. And she would tell me who these particular people were. And then it got to the point where I started telling her who these people were, right? And that my parents claimed that I could read like when I was 2. So they bought me a set of encyclopedias. And my favorite section was the President of the United States. And, looking back, I was drawn to the pages because you had all these little headshots,
I remember.
You're fascinated with that, right? And you're like, so I just got fascinated with the presidency. And, I was learning all this stuff, like who was the fattest, who served the longest, who shortest. I was like a trivia buff and all that stuff. So that's what really kind of got me interested. I mean, I was still young, so I like baseball and meteorology. I thought I would be a weatherman at one time. I mean, just all, just being a kid, just enjoying stuff, but politics was always there. And despite all the stuff I wanted to do, right, play baseball, be a fireman, be a meteorologist, whatever, eventually I wanted to be president.
Okay.
So that was kind of my goal. And so my first political victory was my junior year. Well, really my sophomore year, but we were running for junior class president. And
I love it.
I was kind of considered more of a class clown more than anything serious, but I gave this great speech and they voted me in as president. So that was my first political campaign.
Do you still remember the speech?
No, I don't remember the speech word for word, but I do remember the theme.
Okay.
And real quick, what happened was the class, our sophomore class had this stupid idea. And I say that now, and I'm really being nice, to sell bumper stickers and window decals for cars. And it's like, we don't drive. You know what I'm saying? It was like, all of us take public transportation to the school. It's like very few of us drove. And especially with the gang situation around, we definitely weren't going to drive because we don't want them breaking into our cars. We really didn't have a place to park either. But nonetheless, that's what they did. So we ended up losing money out that deal. And so my campaign was, basically like, we've got to be the only high school class in America that's broke. You know what I'm saying? And I was just going in, and I just said, we're not gonna do crazy stuff like that. We're gonna do stuff that we can make money off of, and our class shirts are gonna be fly because that was the duty of the junior class to pick the class shirt design for our senior year. So I said, we're gonna have the best class shirts and all that stuff. So yeah,
I love it.
Like I said, I didn't remember. And I wasn't the only one that ran on the theme about being broke either.
About being broke. Right. Okay, that's a good segue because inquiring minds want to know. This is a question I really, really wanted to ask you because many of us are so curious and we don't understand. The general public does not understand. Tell us how the money works in politics. There are millions spent on candidates. Where does the money go? Where we have an idea where it's coming from now because it's pretty much not public knowledge to some extent in some cases. But millions, I mean, record-breaking millions, where does the money go? And how do you get it?
So just to highlight your point, we just had a major runoff election here in Georgia for United States Senate. Raphael Warnock, who won, just for the 4 weeks between November the 8th and December the 6th.
Mm-hmm.
He's $50 million.
My goodness.
That's over $10 million a week when you break it down.
That's incredible.
And they spend it. So what you spend that on, the reason why, especially these high profile races, they spend it on TV and newspaper and radio advertising.
Okay.
That television advertising is the most expensive expenditure for a campaign.
Okay.
You just
come on. You think he spent $50 million in 4 weeks?
Yeah.
There's no surplus or excess left over for something?
No, because it's like, they may have some cash at hand, but it's not that much because the television advertising is so high.
Yeah. Okay. And that's true.
It used to be a time, because it was the public airwaves, you didn't have to pay for campaign advertising. But as TV needed advertising dollars to keep it free, especially competing with cable, decided to start charging. And so when you have a media market like Atlanta, it's going to cost a lot of money. $50 million in Mississippi you would blow the opposition away if you had $50 million in Mississippi. But in Atlanta and the Georgia market, because you not only have Atlanta, but you have Savannah, you have Columbus, and they have their own media things. I think Augusta is considered a media market too. It's like you've got to spend that money, and you got to spend the money. Radio advertising is cheap, but you have to buy a whole lot of ads. So the more advertising that you buy, the more name recognition.
The more you saturate the public with your theme, with your face.
Right.
Yeah.
And then all those beautiful yard signs that you see on the road and in people's yards, that's campaign expenditure. People have gotten away from the bumper stickers now, but a few campaigns still do that. Just everything that you see, the T-shirts.
Yeah.
And then the people out there saying, "Hey, vote for so and so, vote for Erik." They gotta be paid. These folks are the word volunteer is it's not.
I know it doesn't exist anymore much.
Yeah.
However, I volunteered for 2 campaigns, and I know how grueling they can be, especially if you're in the neighborhood and you're going door to door. One was for a city council person, okay. And the other was the Obama campaign. The first, I was a volunteer. His first term.
Yeah.
And when I think about the money, okay, I'm thinking in context of I've reviewed budgets for school districts. That may be $66 million for the year. Right. So I'm thinking about a campaign using $50 million in 4 weeks. Does that in any way? I have no judgment about the matter. It's just I would love to actually look at a campaign budget, a 4-week budget, and just see the itemization of the $50 million for 4 weeks. But I guess it leaves a question for the general public too, because we're sitting back on the outside looking. Is that a misplacement of values, of assets, of time, of money, or because you've been in it? So, or is it always money well spent?
Well, I don't know about money well spent. It's money that has to be spent. Right. Okay. Because if you want to have the best presence, even when you were knocking on doors, see all that stuff that you were handing out to those folks, that's paid out of campaign funds. So people.
What about when they lose, Erik? Is it still money well spent even when they lose? Because I guess
Well,
you need the money to fight a good fight, huh?
I mean, yeah, I mean, it's a 50-50 proposition when you jump in there anyway, right?
True. True.
And so you have to go in with the reality that you may not be the choice. But you've got to put the best strategy together. And you don't necessarily have to have all the money in the world to run an effective campaign, but what money you do have, you have to strategize the best way to utilize it. And one of the things that we try to teach people running for office is that you budget backwards instead of forward, right? You make sure you have enough money on election day to make your last push. You make sure that you've got your precincts covered with workers, that you've got, signage, that you've got shirts and all that stuff. And once you've got election day set up, then you work your way back. Okay. So, a month worth of advertising leading to the election is going to cost how much? How many TV ads you want to buy? How many you want to buy? How many newspaper ads you got to buy? All that kind of stuff. But I mean, you got to if you're running statewide, you got to pay for gas to get you around. If you do like some of these campaigns and get like buses and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
We had a situation where it's like I had, a candidate that had to go from one end of the state to the other, doing campaign stops. And so we had to figure out how much it's going to cost to charter a plane to get him to where he's got to be, or a helicopter.
I see. Yeah.
And all that stuff, whereas like in Mississippi, for example, you've got 82 counties. In Georgia, you got 159. And so, a lot of stuff, is centered around Atlanta, but Atlanta's kind of north, right? There's a whole lot of states south. And you got two major, Columbus and Savannah south. So you've got to get Macon, you got to get to all those spots. Georgia's, if you just wanted to do college tours, it's like 20 colleges in the state of Georgia alone. So it costs money to run an effective campaign, and then you got to pay staff. You got to pay a campaign manager. A fundraiser basically raises their own money. But all that stuff has to be paid. You got to pay people. You got to pay for polls and all this other stuff. So if you're a vendor, political vendor, it's like, when you have these congressional and presidential elections, you can make a killing.
Oh gosh, yes. We're all in the wrong business.
Yeah. Side of it, I guess, in my case.
And I want to stay there for a second with Georgia, because once again, Georgia was in the national spotlight. Okay, let's go back before we talk about Warnock and Walker. Let's go back with all the progress that Georgia has made overall with Stacy Abrams at the helm of that, rocking the vote. Why don't you think she won, even at 2 tries?
So we only got a few minutes to talk. So, but
okay.
Bottom line is that the first time was really close, and she it's like usually the first time you're running against somebody and it's an open seat, it's going to be close, especially in a state like Georgia, and it's going to be real competitive, and you don't really know what the other side is going to do until they do it, and you just have to counter and all that kind of stuff. So now a rematch 4 years later, well, one, the person she's running against now is the governor, and he kind of knows her playbook, right?
Right.
And so, and to be honest, the legislature kind of helped, in trying to make it tougher for people to be able to vote, especially people that more than likely would vote for her. But
Sure.
it didn't stop people from coming, but there were a lot of dynamics at play. When you strictly look at her versus him. But
Let
you
me
know,
jump in. Let me jump in because we're going to double dutch this because I know we don't have much time.
yeah,
So, I mean, you and I, we already know we talk offline for hours. So, we're going to we're going to try to stay in this zone for another 30 minutes and keep this an hour. But is it true? So you live in Georgia now, and so you know you're sort of you're still advocating in politics and all of that good stuff. I it was my understanding that some people felt that she was more of a national figure, or maybe that she was somehow self-serving in her efforts in the second run. Is that what you guys really perceive her to be in Georgia? Or was that just some of the negative ads and rhetoric that they were throwing around regarding her? Because she seems, I mean, she can't help that she's a national figure at this point. But I want to hear you as a resident, not as the political Eric, but what's the general perception of her in Georgia? Because I mean, she's admired far and wide, but and it baffles us. It seems bizarre that she wouldn't win that second time around, especially because she got so close the first time.
well, as if you look at it from a resident's viewpoint, there was some resentment about that, and to Kemp's credit, he actually ran an ad called "Celebrity Stacy," uh,
Uh,
and so if she was white, that wouldn't have mattered as much.
mm-hmm.
But because she is black, uh, and you are in the South, there is an element of people that don't cater to that. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
there's an element of people that don't cater to a woman being a
Mm-hmm.
stature, and so she has to navigate those two things being in the South, first of all. So as far as black people were concerned, there were rumblings about she wasn't connecting with black men, but on election day and through the early voting process, black men showed up in high numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as far as the black community was concerned, there wasn't as much, even though there were some high profile black people that did not endorse her. There was, and there's some backstory behind that. But the reality was, as a whole, the black community rallied around her. The issue was there were a lot of people that felt that Kemp was more in tune with what the people of Georgia wanted, especially during the pandemic.
Mm.
He fought to keep businesses open despite the health warnings. And, I mean, it's like a lot of people died in Georgia because of that, but a lot of businesses survived the pandemic because of that. So,
Wow.
yeah. So it was, from a residence, it all depends on where you live. If you
Yeah.
want a resident's perspective from the black community, she was fine. And they're the ones who kind of put her on that pedestal. So they understood. But, in the white community, there was some backlash for it.
Where do you think she's going next? What are you predicting?
I don't know what she's gonna do. If I was advising her, I'd tell her that she needs to get that lawyer briefcase dusted off and go help Mark Elias file these lawsuits.
Mhm. So
to
she's a JD. She has a
Yeah,
license.
yeah,
Oh,
she's an attorney and she's an accomplished author. She writes romance novels under another pseudonym, but
get out.
yeah, yeah.
Who
So,
knew?
um, um, but she's an attorney, and so uh, hopefully she can get a judicial appointment, um, or AG appointment with a Democratic president down the line.
Mm-hmm.
But uh, the main thing that she's going to do is continue to push to fight voter suppression laws and continue to get people registered to vote. That organization that she set up now is perpetual, and they're going to be around for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So, I see her still being involved in that fight. But, if I was her, I'd be in a courtroom. Every time they change the voting law in the state, I'd be flying out there trying to help that council, like Ben
Gosh,
Crump
yes.
goes
Yes.
everywhere to help people that are victims of police brutality. She needs to be that same kind of attorney going all over the country, making sure that voting rights are protected.
Yeah, and I'm surprised I missed that about her because I was following her work for a little bit, and she did, of course, an amazing TED talk. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that sounds like a job that she could handle.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Oh yeah, and I'm gonna be looking up her romance novels. I'm gonna try to figure out what her pen name is.
The name she uses, but if you Google it, they'll tell you what name she uses.
Okay, that's pretty
He's
cool.
written
That's
he's written several books.
Oh, that's a fun fact to know under a
Yeah,
pen name. Okay. I think
yeah.
a lot of folks gonna be looking that up. Now, let's fast forward a little bit because this recent campaign between Warnock and Walker.
Mm,
Okay, first it was a tight race, and that's shocking, right? Considering the two candidates. Why do
very.
you think the residents of Georgia was so drawn to Walker?
Well, if you understand Herschel Walker's history, Herschel Walker is a legend in the state of Georgia. Prior to them winning the national championship last year, he was on the last team to win one. He was probably one of the greatest college football players to play. He's from Wrightsville, Georgia. It's a little small town. And, so he,
I get the sentiment, Eric, but come on now. Once he made himself public and kept continue to talk. I
well,
mean,
it just came down to black and white, right? It just came down to the fact that uh, white folks vote Republican for the most part here. Um, I mean, you've got pockets, of course, in Atlanta and in the metro area of white support for Democrats, but the reality is that you got a lot of white folks that vote Republican,
mm-hmm.
and the Republicans thought, well, he's a football hero, maybe the black folks will cross over and vote for him. And it's like, but you're running against the man who is the pastor of Martin Luther King's church, but
Right,
you're not going to beat that guy, not in the black,
right.
you know. And so it was like the preacher versus the football player, and and black folks wanted the preacher because not only has he done a good job while the 2 years that he's been up there, but I mean standing and listening to him talk, and then listening to Herschel talking about werewolves and vampires and all that. It's like, no, man, we got to go Warnock. So black folks are upset. Black folks in Georgia are upset. They're mad, and they're mad because you threw Herschel Walker out there thinking that he was going to attract us to vote for him. Right. And then the second thing is, it was too close. At first, runoff, so we had to go back and vote again.
Right.
And then it was negative. I mean, Walker at one point on December the 6th was ahead in the votes. And so black folks in Georgia are hot. They
No, wait a minute. Not black folks in Georgia. Black folks all over America.
Yeah.
Because at some point it was turning into a circus, like it was the greatest show on earth. It was like, are y'all seriously thinking that the intelligent black people, beautiful black people of Georgia are gonna vote for him? And I have no shade to throw at the brother in the sense that Lord knows he was trying, like the little train that could, okay? Yeah. But it's just it's just remarkable how at the cost of anything, it's like as long as he's a Republican and with a pulse, and it's offensive. It should be offensive to Republicans too, black or white, because he was clearly not the best fit and the best candidate. Even he did not align with their values. He was not prepared for this type of role, but yet they were pushing him so strong. And like you said, the fact that it got into a runoff was startling to Americans all over the United States.
Yeah, you had some libertarian candidate that was able to get 2% of the vote. So it's like, so now, and Warnock's polling knew it because he was running commercials, knocking on people's doors, bringing Thanksgiving dinners, talking about, if you don't want me to come to your Thanksgiving dinner, you don't need to have a runoff. You know what I'm saying? But, it happened. And like I said, black folks are hot here. They may be hot everywhere, but they're really hot here because they're looking at their white neighbors like, okay, all right. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it was just such. Yeah, it was hard to watch.
It was embarrassing
from afar. So I can imagine how, like you said, you guys feel living there. And yeah. I'm so disappointed because I have no shame in telling folks I voted both blue or red at different points in my life. And most of the time it felt like, not most of the time, I shouldn't say that, but sometimes once you narrowed it down, it felt like the lesser of two evils. Like, which one am I going to go with? Okay.
Yeah.
But this seemed to be a clear-cut case of who was the most qualified, the most prepared, the most knowledgeable, the better representation of any party at this point.
But it's deeper than that. It shows the real divide in America we are, and the fact that in the Democratic Party, we used to have a saying that we'll vote for a yellow dog if it's a Democrat, and so we actually used to have a yellow dog Democrats club, right? So I mean, the partisan thing is nothing new, but it's like, it really took a turn. And then Donald Trump really had his hands on Herschel Walker. And they've had a history, because Herschel was like the first player he drafted when he owned the New Jersey Generals. So they've had it for a long time. And he really was the catalyst. So the Republicans' hands were kind of tied. Now there was at least one qualified black candidate that ran in the Republican primary, but because he didn't have Donald Trump's blessing, he wasn't even in the conversation. So it was Herschel against everybody else who was trying to show how Trumpian they were. But that was the guy that Donald Trump wanted. So the Republicans went with that. And, in the South, well, I guess you can say in Arizona and some places out West, Trump is like still revered. And despite everything that we see on the news, he's still a revered figure. And so when he put his anointing on Herschel, that pretty much was all he needed to get the nomination and then, carry over into the general election. But
yeah, I heard them referring to him often as the kingmaker.
Who, Trump?
Yes.
Yeah, well, the attempted kingmaker. Now, he pulled it off in Ohio with J.D. Vance, but he publicly humiliated Vance, and Vance had to eat that crow to get that endorsement. But, it didn't work with Dr. Oz. It didn't work with Blake Masters in Arizona. It didn't work in
Michigan. Was no red wave.
Yeah, it didn't work with a lot of other places. As a matter of fact, a lot of those places flipped. And so what Donald Trump has done is that, to the chagrin or discomfort of the Republicans, is that he's put them in a box and he's made states that have been traditionally Republican more competitive. Georgia is now competitive. Arizona is now competitive. Pennsylvania is now competitive. So it's like in Ohio, I mean, Vance won, but he didn't win by that much. So it's like those states now have become battleground states even more so. Mm-hmm. And the shock was Florida, how lopsided it was there. But, I mean, it is what it is. I think that until we get a lot of that element out of the Republican conversation, we'll start getting more qualified candidates on both sides. The Democrats did a real good job running qualified candidates all the way down the ticket. It's just that, in certain parts of the country, it doesn't matter. And so, when you got that mind,
like in Texas is red.
This is even, we were kind of shocked about, how bad Beto lost.
I was too, yeah. It was shot, and that was his third attempt.
Well, I mean, that was his, I think it was second attempt for governor, maybe. I don't know. But I mean, Beto, hopefully.
Maybe second for governor.
Yeah, he may end up getting, because he ran for the Senate and he ran for president.
That's right. Yep.
But, it was like, Beto is a good guy, but, he obviously is not the guy that can get that crossover vote, right, in Texas.
Right.
He's get the Democratic base with no problem. But, winning a state like winning it over, it just has to be the right candidate a lot of times, the right timing. Arizona was primed for a change. Georgia was primed for a change. Pennsylvania definitely was primed for a change. So, I mean, in Michigan, this is the first real strong victory Michigan has had since the unions have been weakened. It was like when the unions were strong, Democrats could win all the time in Michigan. But, they because of all the stuff that Republicans did government-wise to weaken unions, mm-hmm. Places like Michigan became competitive again. But now, you got some strong candidates running. Wisconsin was kind of a disappointment. We got the governor reelected, but we didn't get Mandela Barnes elected. So, it's just, I mean, and there's still tinges of, I say tinges, but there's still racism out there. And there's still discomfort with seeing people of color being in these prominent positions. And until we pass that, it's always going to be an uphill battle. I mean, I've like it's, I've done it twice statewide in Mississippi. We had a guy who was an astrophysicist and a preacher in Arkansas get beat by Sarah Huckabee Sanders. You know what I'm saying? Wow. It was obviously clear who was the most qualified and most intelligent candidate in that race, but they went with Sarah. And so, because her daddy was the governor. So, I mean, it's still a mountain to climb for Black folks to get there, but we make progress. I mean, 4 of the largest cities in America are now run by Black people. So, it's we've got a Black woman as a vice president. We've had a Black president. We've got Black people in the Senate now, even though, some candidates should have won this time. We still have at least 3, right? We got Booker, Warnock, Tim Scott, who's the Republican in the Senate. So, we're making progress.
Well, I think, you talk about progress and as African American community, certainly. But when I think about politics in general, it's so disheartening. At this point, many people are ripe for the picking for a strong liberal because the right is too far right and the left is too far left. I mean, there's no reasoning anymore, and everything seems to be such a battle just to get basic service because they forget they work for the people. So, what advice would you give to someone looking to run for office in today's climate There's a lot of mudslinging, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. It's just ugly, and I know that people are. I've heard you mention before that politics is pretty much a bloodbath at times. And we're watching, right? As I think about the Roman Stadium, and we're watching the gladiators go at it, but it doesn't make us feel any more secure. So, what advice would you give to someone going into politics now? How do you handle the mudslinging? What's the best approach to take? And even if that approach causes you to lose?
Well, the best approach to take is to really be, really have the pulse of the people that you're trying to get to support you. I think if you stay focused on issues that the average citizen gravitates to, and deliver a strong message, be credible, be sure of your convictions, right? Because the bottom line is a vote is an act of trust. I trust you with this vote to serve the best interest of the community that you want to represent. And whether it's a state, whether it's a district, or, have whatever boundary or geographical or president even, we're trusting that person that we vote for to be the person that does no harm and thinks about the next generation instead of the next election. And so your message has to be that way. And, don't get hung up on money. Don't get hung up on what the other side is doing. Focus in on what you want to do and how you want to get that message out. And I think that if you stay with that basic foundation, everything will fall into place.
It sounds like a clean approach. We just never see that anymore. And it's really sad.
Well, records are fair game. If you're running against an incumbent and they push the policy or whatever that you think is harmful, that's fair game to go after. When you start talking about, their kids and what they did with their wives, and, did they cheat on a test in college? When it gets to that point, that's just pettiness. Mm-hmm. But as long as it's about issues, it's about voting records and all that stuff, that's fair game. And that's really what the American people want to see, is a contrast so they can make an intelligent decision.
Sure. So let me ask you this. Will you ever go back into politics? You're not too old to run for president. Look at Papa Joe and 45.
Well, you never say never. I always look at my life, because I was able to be elected at a young age, and I felt I did good work when I was there. People still let me come back to Mississippi and say hi to me and feed me and all that.
Okay.
But the reality is that, it's just like when you say it's like a sport, athletes have their moment and then they have to retire. So I don't know if I'm past my moment. I don't know if I can make a comeback per se, but, the podcast is good therapy for me, and I'm able to still address issues, and I can address issues on my own terms that way. But you never say never. You never know. With the knowledge I have, the experience I have, if something avails itself that I'm interested in, I might jump back out there.
Oh yeah, why not? And for the record too, I want to let my listeners know that I'm a veteran, and no matter what happens, I usually try to maintain a high level of respect for whoever is in office, and so we affectionately call President Biden Papa Joe in my house because he's so old. Or I shouldn't say old. He's a mature president.
Yeah, I mean, he'll say he's old. I
He's
mean,
old. And
but
40
I mean,
and POTUS 45 is definitely old. I don't even know why he announced to run again because it's just not. Listen, you already age in dog years when you're in office.
yeah.
I'm telling you, I don't, that makes me nervous when people past a certain age are trying to do this. I think there should be a cutoff. And I'm not trying to be funny. I just think it's such a tremendous task. Like
Well, I mean,
at a certain age.
well, the dynamics played out, you know, the best person to counter Donald Trump and the chaos he created was to have somebody that was like a 40-year veteran of politics, somebody that had been the vice president, somebody that had been in the Senate for a long time that, you know, could bring us back to some sense of normalcy, right? And,
True.
you know, it's like, you know, the early prognostications, even people that were on my podcast was like, yeah, he's probably too old to be doing this, but you know what I'm saying? He was the best option.
He was a sobering option.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so, you know, it's like in that case, you know, age had its benefit in that way. But, you know, it's very rare you're gonna see a John Kennedy or a Barack Obama, right? It's very rare that you have that lightning in a bottle in a younger person to get at that national stage and command the attention and get the support needed to win that office. So, you know, a lot of times you're going to have older people that have been engaged in the political process for a long time, even if it was just at a local level, be in a position where they can run. I mean, Pete Buttigieg, you know, he's now the transportation secretary, but he ran for president. He was a mayor of a town.
Right.
You know, so it's like, you know, when you get, you know, people respond to people who actually have had the experience. Donald Trump was a real anomaly. And people were like, well, we really want to send a message about the system. We just going to elect somebody who ain't never ran for anything else before. But you see what happens when you do that, right? It's like the law says that you don't have to be a lawyer to be on the Supreme Court. But can you imagine just average, ordinary people who never picked up a law book being appointed to make decisions about the Constitution of the United States? I mean, you know, there's the romantic thing about you can make a movie about some guy getting appointed to be a Supreme Court justice, but in real life, you want somebody that understands what law is, that can actually spell law, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So, I mean, you know,
right. Well,
so
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I have to ask this question while we're in this vein. Well, what are your thoughts about this? Do you ever think we'll see a Latinx or an Asian president or African ever?
yeah,
You
yeah.
think so?
You know,
In
I
your
mean,
lifetime? In our
yeah,
lifetime?
I mean, Kamala Harris is a heartbeat away, literally, from being the president now. And a
True.
lot of people are thinking if Biden decides, you know what, I'm not going to do this again, she's probably going to be the front runner. You know, I mean, when you saw the Democratic primary when Biden was running, it was the most diverse primary anybody had ever seen in America as far as people running for president. And it's not necessarily all going to be from the Democratic side. I mean, you have people of Asian descent that, like Nikki Haley, you know, as a Republican.
That's true. Yeah. And because there was a rumor that she might run, but I think
Yeah.
she said she wouldn't if 45 announced his candidacy. So I don't know if she still stands by that, given that his popularity has fallen dramatically. But that you're right about Haley. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, there are viable people now of all ethnic backgrounds that are in the spotlight nationally. I mean, uh, Omar, Oman, the representative from Minnesota. I mean, she's a Somali refugee. You know what I'm saying? Now she's a member of Congress. You got people from Eritrea who are serving in Congress in the United States.
Right.
And if Puerto Rico becomes a state, which may happen in our lifetime, then you're going to have an influx of Latino politicians that have experience that are going to get there. Plus, you've got where you in Texas and Florida. So I mean, the opportunity is there now for people of all races to be in a position. I mean, we just talked about Buttigieg. I mean, he is a member of the LGBTQ community, right? So we may see somebody from that community ascend to the presidency in our lifetime. So it's wide. As long as we maintain the democracy, anything is possible. If we go to what Trump and them want and authoritarianism,
exactly. Yeah.
It's a wrap.
I
So
can't believe he said we should get rid of the Constitution. I mean, that should be treasonous.
it should be.
Yeah.
It's like he has been allowed to just be the bull in the china shop when it comes to the democratic process in the United States. And it looks like the only way you're going to stop him is if the judicial process kicks in and he gets indicted and goes to jail. I think that's the only way you can really stop him. But then the movement that he's created, you got all these wannabes that say, well, I can assume the throne, boss, if you're not available, and so DeSantis in Florida is the main one vying to be the new Sun King, as we call it. So we'll see how it goes. But to answer your question directly, yeah, I can see somebody from the Latino community, somebody from the AAPI community. I can see somebody that's a native, an indigenous being in. We've got a cabinet member now. We've got a new Congress woman out of Alaska.
That's right.
So yeah, it can happen.
It would be amazing to see. I mean, to see things really heightened to that level of diversity. It just would be amazing. Because that's what we are, right? We're a great, big old, beautiful tossed salad. And so, there are so many different opportunities there, but it does matter who's in charge. And I think the diversity needs to be seen at the highest level. And
Yeah.
so we shall see what happens. I remember my grandfather when Obama came into office, and he cried. He said, I never thought I'd see this in my lifetime.
Right.
So I'm glad he was able to experience that before he passed away. But yeah, it's just kind of one of those things you think about. And after Obama, then you think, oh, yeah, okay, we may have a female president. But it's hard to get past that sometimes when people say Latino, Asian, it's like, really? Yeah, okay, yeah. So it's just would be interesting to see the next few years how things pan out.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
I remember you were talking about the older generations. Just remember now, there are children who saw Barack Obama be president. There are children that see Kamala Harris as the vice president.
That's right.
They are seeing people that they can recognize and identify being leaders in the United States Congress. So, it's going to happen. I mean, we've got a 25-year-old in the United States Congress going in January. I mean, so young people are seeing that there are opportunities. So as they become of age and become voters, that's the impression they have, and that's what America is going to have to deal with, is that those people are now saying it's our turn, and they're going to be the best options for people to vote for.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's definitely never going to be a dull moment in politics.
No.
And you know that too because you have your podcast, A Moment with Erik Fleming. tell the listeners how they can tune in and what it's about and how they can connect.
So, it's a political podcast. There's a couple of things that I stress. One, we're going to talk about it from an African American perspective, as opposed to a corporate media perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to have a conversation. We're not going to have a confrontation. I'm a Democrat, and there's no going back for me on that. But if you're a Republican or Libertarian or Green Party or whatever, and you want to come on the show, we can have conversations about your viewpoints, and really I try to convince my people that are listening to support your positions, right?
Right.
So that's basically the gist of the show, is just to keep everybody informed. I try to get people on, because everything is political, right? And so it doesn't matter what you talk about. Politics has its footprint or a handprint on whatever you're trying to do. And so if you're a nonprofit, you're talking about your nonprofit, well, the government gives out grants to folks. The biggest foundation in America is the United States government. So, it's like everything that we do in our life is based on politics. Mm-hmm. And I always remind people, if you don't believe me, take away those stop signs on the intersection and see what happens. So so politics is really the fiber outside of money. Politics is really the fiber. And if you really look at it, politics dictates about the money too.
Oh, yes. Yeah, we know that. So, we know that part. Yeah. I met David Petraeus once, and he told me, if you ever want to know what's happening, just follow the money.
Follow the money.
Follow the money. Well, Erik, It's been such a pleasure, as usual, talking to you. And we'll have to have you back for a part 2, part 3, especially when it comes to hot politics. I want to thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Well, it's an honor, Doctor, to be on your show. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate it too. What fun, what fun, what fun. Well, folks, that's a wrap for tonight. I want to thank you for tuning in. And as always, thank you for being a team player.